You're watching Beyond Market. Welcome, I'm Esther, Awoniyi. Many thanks for joining us today. On the show, we'll be focusing on trade relations between Nigeria and the United States. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Market, and you can follow my Twitter handle too at Esther O. Awoniyi. Now, with the global trade landscape changing rapidly, how is the U.S. seeking to deepen ties with Nigeria? Brent Omdahl, Commercial Counselor at the U.S. Embassy representing the Department of Commerce, joins me for today's discussion. Brent, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning, Esther. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, the U.S. is a very important, if not the most important diplomatic partner to Nigeria, but when it comes to trade also, the U.S. is still the largest or the biggest foreign investor in Nigeria. So obviously both countries have a very, very good, important relationship. But let's focus on trade right now.
Sure.
How would you describe the state of trade trade relations between the U.S. and Nigeria right now?
Yeah, so definitely the trade relations are healthy. We have bilateral trade that's among the largest in Africa. This is an important destination market for U.S. exports, the largest on the continent after South Africa. And we export some important products and services to this market that not only build value in the United States, but build value locally. What I mean by that is much of what we export here goes into value chains that support the growth of industries here. One of my favorite examples is the dredge industry in the United States. There are just really a handful of dredge manufacturers around the world. Two of them are located in the United States. And we've seen a real growth in our business. But what does that mean for Nigeria? Well, one of the untold stories is that has really gone to stimulate growth of the cement industry here, as Dangote made investments. But also in exploring new areas for oil and gas. You need to dredge whenever you put a pipeline in underwater, or if you're exploring in the rivers areas, new places of exploration. And so for me, that's a great win-win story that exemplifies kind of the trading relationship between the U.S. and Nigeria.
Let me ask you this, because every country has an Africa strategy. I mean, if you just think about what China is doing right now. So let me ask you this. What is the U.S.'s Africa strategy?
It's a great question. So overall, the current administration has made it very clear that our strategy is to move further away from aid, development aid, and more to trade. By definition, that makes it a more equal relationship. And so what's actually happening to try to deepen that relationship? At the end of last year, our Congress passed the BUILD Act, which is now establishing the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, which is a merger between our Overseas Private Investment Corporation and one part of USAID called the Development Credit Authority. That's doing a number of things that should help the investment and trade relationship in Nigeria specifically, because it does have a focus overall on Africa. One is that it's doubling the size of investment funds that the U.S. government is actually putting in to Africa and other emerging markets. Secondly, it's freeing up some of the restrictions on investment. Much of what OPIC did previously was lend money, and now we're actually going to see some equity investment into funds that will be then have access to small and medium-sized companies, but also to projects as well. So we're excited about the new US IDFC that will come online later this year, probably in October or in the last quarter of the year. Another awesome development that I'm very excited about is the US Export-Import Bank just announced that they have a full board. We've been hampered for about the past 3 years without a full board at XM, which has meant that we haven't been able to provide financing for the acquisition of U.S. products and services abroad for any deal over $10 million. Now we're back in the game. And so there have been a number of projects on hold throughout the continent and in Nigeria where U.S. equipment and services play a critical role, and now we'll be open for that. And then, Esther, just a third point that I would mention is about 1.5 years ago, recognizing that many of the solutions for growing trade and investment between our countries lie with the private sector. My Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, signed together with Minister Enalama of the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, the U.S.-Nigeria Commercial and Investment Dialogue. It's focused on 3 specific sectors to grow trade and investment in the ICT sector, in the ag sector, and in infrastructure. I mean, these are three critical sectors that are central to the ongoing development of the Nigerian market. We've kind of taken two tracks with this. One is a policy track. We have a number of policy mechanisms. I mean, we're all familiar with the major impediments to investment, and the dialogue is meant to tackle systematically together some of these impediments, creating policy that is as inviting as possible to new investment. And then there's a kind of a deal track to it as well. And what I mean by that is, regardless of where an investor is investing in the world, there are bumps along the road, even in the smoothest markets. And so we've created, our partners on this are the Department of Commerce and the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, working with Yewande Saduku, the head of that organization. We've created an excellent platform where we can bring issues that our American investors are having forward to the NIPC. They've been such a great advocate internal to the Nigerian government to try to clear some of these impediments away. So it's it's kind of policy related, but also on a very practical term, we're making investments and trade deals happen.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned impediments, because I was just going to ask you, how does the average American investor perceive the Nigerian market? Those who are either new, or those who are even, who've been doing business here for a while?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, most American companies still do not know much about the Nigerian market. They understand that the future is in Africa, and they understand that the biggest market is Nigeria. And really, economically speaking, the way Nigeria goes from a business point of view is the way that Africa will go. So it's a critical market, and I think that's well understood by our current government, the U.S. government. Now, there are some pioneer investors in markets like Nigeria from the U.S. GE would be one that would come to mind, and some of them are household names. But there have been some other investments in the recent past that speak to that as well, particularly in the consumer goods space, like Kellogg's is now manufacturing and is doing product development specific for the Nigerian market and specific to West Africa. They'll use this as a hub. What's cool is that a number of our developers are getting in the game as well. One of them is Rendeavor, who is developing 1/4 of the quadrant of the Lekki Free Trade Zone. Oh. And actually, both of those companies that I mentioned, Kellogg's and Rendeavor, are participating with us in the U.S. Fair that we'll talk about in a moment.
But we'll talk about that in just a moment. But sometimes because the perception out there is mixed when it comes to how people look at Nigeria, and now with the security issues that we're having, especially up in the north, what we've heard sometimes is that there's interest. Definitely, because this is a big market, like you said, and many just cannot ignore the size of the market, but they're quite concerned about the safety of their investment. For the American companies, how do you allay those fears?
Right. So it is a truth that, one aspect of doing business in Nigeria that companies still have to deal with are, and these become extra cost items for them when they're considering an investment. One is safety and security, right? You got to be sure to protect your assets, and the other is power. I mean, when you're in the manufacturing business in Nigeria, you have to really consider the implications of power. And so what's been very interesting to see is some recent progress on the power front, for instance. On our aid side, we've been doing a lot of work to kind of get the mini grid space going. And perhaps that's the best solution for Nigeria, at least in the short term, is the emergence of small IPPs that can serve not only communities, but also the manufacturing interests that are here as well, to help bring those, when you're paying for diesel, the price is high. If you can move that to gas and do it in an IPP fashion, that becomes less. So those are kind of some of the issues that American companies are dealing with. But notwithstanding, Esther, I'm so excited because the word is getting out. I mean, not only in the consumer goods space, but also most recently in the ICT space. You might have seen on Friday that Microsoft announced the new Africa Development Center located right here in Lagos.
We did speak to them about that. Yeah, the U.S. has a number of programs, that it has here in the country, and for me, one significant program that comes to mind is AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. Just a brief assessment of that, that program, what is achieved so far, and where it is right now.
Yeah, so great question. The Africa Growth and Opportunities Act is what we call a unilateral trade concession. What that means simply is that U.S. Congress passed a law that provides duty-free access to almost all goods from African countries that comply with some of the terms. And the terms are, pretty easy to comply with. Nigeria has been part of the program. Now, what is maybe not well understood by the Nigerian business sector is that that's really all that AGOA is. It is up to the Nigerian business and government sector to organize itself to take full advantage of AGOA. So there are still, to export food products to the U.S., you still have to comply with U.S. FDA regulations. And so what we've seen in the recent past are the emergence of some AGOA resource centers that will help Nigerian exporters kind of get up to speed, to get on game, to be able to export to the United States.
It's quite interesting that we're still talking about that now, because it's been several years now, we're yet to fully harness that opportunity.
That's right. So, in fact, a couple of years ago, the legislation was renewed for another 10 years. So I think we're at about 8 years now until another assessment will be made as to whether it will be renewed. So another piece of good news is that our U.S. Agency for International Development, which has a very active portfolio in the private sector as well, trying to use private sector resources to get the market going, is opening in the near term, sometime this year in Abuja, a U.S. a West Africa Trade and Investment Hub.
Okay.
And one of the aspects of that will be to work with Nigerian private sector enterprises and entities, associations and the like, to create some more of these resource centers and help folks access the U.S. market that way.
Okay, Brent, thank you for your time so far. When we come back, we're just going to
Sure.
pause and take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the U.S. fair.
Great, thank you.
I've been speaking to Brent Omdahl. He's a commercial counselor at the U.S. Embassy here in Nigeria, representing the Department of Commerce. We'll be right back after this short break to join us again. Welcome back to Beyond Market. If you're just joining us, Brent Omdahl, commercial counselor at the U.S. Embassy representing the Department of Commerce, is with me today, and we are discussing trade relations between the U.S. and Nigeria. Brent, thank you for your time so far.
Thanks, Esther.
Now let's get right down to, of course, the big event, the U.S. fair. Talk to us about that.
Sure. So from the 21st to the 23rd of May, Tuesday to Thursday of this week, we have USA Fair 2019. 33 American companies are in town. Most of them are new to market, meaning this is their first real exposure to partnerships in Nigeria. The 3-day fair is an exhibition which will run for 2 days, meaning that Nigerian businesses can register to come and over to the ECHO Convention Center and meet face-to-face in booths with the American companies that are presenting themselves. We'll kick off the first day with Minister Enalama. We're grateful for his support. He and Ambassador Symington will lead a keynote session, which has folks like Yewande Suduku, the head of the NIPC, talking about why Nigeria is the market of the next decade. Bismarck Rwani will also come and give us one of his vintage speeches about where the Nigerian economy is headed and maybe some prognostication and advice for moving forward. Also, the American business community who's on the ground will be represented. The head of the American Business Council, Mr. Angbazo, will be there talking about the impact of U.S. business in the market already and what we can do to really deepen partnerships together.
Now, sorry to butt in, for these 23 companies, was there marketing done to these 23 companies? I'm just wondering how, they all came together and decided, you know what, of all the markets in Africa, let's go to Nigeria, or regardless of what we've heard or what the perception is, let's still go to Nigeria.
Sure. It's 33, by the way.
33, okay.
And I'll be honest with you, I think if we had marketed even stronger, we would have upped that number. We got caught a little bit in the U.S. government shutdown during our marketing period for the show. Notwithstanding, we had huge demand, and we were able to bring 33 on board. So just by way of background, the U.S. Commercial Service exists to provide support to U.S. companies entering this market. So I lead a team of 10 who on a daily basis are providing market intelligence to new U.S. companies, providing services, helping them launch their products, find the right business partners. So this is something that we do and is in our DNA. We really this year wanted to start something new and big with regards to the U.S.-Nigeria commercial and investment dialogue that I talked about. What could we do to turbocharge interest and bring many new companies to the continent at one time? The portfolio of companies coming is exciting because it lines up very well with the major sectors in Nigeria.
I was just going to ask you that. I mean, 33, I mean, what kind of sectors are we talking about here?
Sure, we have got some great companies in the ag sector, ranging from providers of cold storage solutions to soil enhancers to actually farm developers. In the power sector, we have some companies that have solutions, some solar power solutions, so that you can be completely off-grid, both as a business and as a residence. We've got actually some developers who are doing a couple of IPPs as well. We have some great ICT companies, some of which are household names, like Oracle, who's on the ground already, is participating with us, but some that you haven't heard of that are excellent and nimble and are looking for partners as well. We also have some fast-moving consumer goods companies, in particular skincare and beauty care. We've found huge demand for those products in this market, and so it was fairly easy to recruit those companies to come as well. In addition to the auto sector, you know, there are some real strong ties between Nigeria and the U.S. in the auto sector, trying to move up the value chain there. Some of our OEMs and other after market producers are looking to find partnerships here as well.
So, I mean, how does this work in terms of from the fair, taking this to the next level for assuming some partnerships do come out from this? What typically happens?
So, you know, we're in the business of matchmaking, of bringing companies together, right? And so what we hope, on the third day, what I didn't mention, so the first 2 days are exhibition. The third day, we actually have individualized meetings. So we've been working with these companies for a couple of months already, talking about what their specific interests are. We have gone out to the market to find partners who fit the bill of what they're looking for. On that third day, they'll have individualized meetings, preset meetings with those companies. What we're looking for out of this are deals, really. So if a company says, hey, we have a new distributor in country, that is a real success for us. We also have developers who are here, like Rendeavor, which is one of the biggest current investors. They're looking for partnerships as well. And what I call them is an investment multiplier, because they're looking to other American companies, but also Nigerians in Europe and other places in the world, to bring new investment into Alaro City, which they're developing out at the Lekki Free Trade Zone.
Now, beyond all of this, and obviously this is something that's going to continue, or are you going to just use this as a test to see how it goes?
So actually, the test is done, because getting 33 with I would say, moderate effort that we put in bodes well for the future. The plan is definitely to grow this over time, bring it to 50 companies next year, 75, 100. As I mentioned earlier, you know, American companies want to figure out Africa. They want to figure out Nigeria. We have found that investment is a continuum, and it typically starts with trade. A company will begin to export its products, and then once the market demand is proven, then they'll, with their partner, look at what we can do to invest and manufacture here. We're looking to to get American companies on that continuum through trade all the way through investment into the market.
Now, as you know, I mean, we're in a time where global trade is evolving rapidly, where countries are now looking, and the U.S. is actually taking the lead in that, and ensuring that there's good trade balance between countries and deals, agreements that are beneficial to both parties. Now, for Nigeria's case, I'm just wondering, for the Nigerian companies themselves, what are those? How can they expand their own horizon in terms of taking advantage of more opportunities in the U.S. market?
Yeah. Okay. So, I would say two things to that. As it relates to the fair, this is meant to build value on both sides of the ocean, so to speak. I mean, if an American company comes here and has a product or service, it may help with supply chain development or manufacturing development of a Nigerian manufacturer or player. Also, just selling into the market here creates jobs and opportunity as well. But trade is a two-way street, as we say. And so we welcome Nigerian products into the U.S. market as well. The infrastructure of my office is not set up to facilitate that, but we maintain strong relationships with a number of multipliers in the U.S. that do that kind of work. So if some of your viewers are interested in entering the U.S. market, we can certainly put them in touch with professional service providers who can help them understand the market, gain market intelligence, and start to develop those relationships that they need to be successful there.
Okay.
To be honest with you, ever since World War II, opening the U.S. market, we like to say the Department of Commerce has been the most powerful foreign policy tool. It has helped create value around the world, first with Germany and Japan that went through rebuilding. But I, as a diplomat, have noticed it as well, have been part of the opening of Vietnam in the late 2000s. We entered into the Vietnamese bilateral trade agreement, which is very similar to AGOA. We saw incredible investment flow into Vietnam from other countries as a result of wanting to take advantage of zero duty access to the U.S. market. The same can and should be happening through Nigeria, and that's why I'm excited about the new trade investment hub coming here that will help provide some support to Nigerian efforts to enter the U.S. market.
Now, while all of this is going on, Africa on its own, Nigeria hasn't joined yet the Africa Continental Free Trade area. That's looking to create the biggest free trade market in the world. What does that mean for the U.S.'s trade strategy, not just with Nigeria, but with the continent as a whole?
So we definitely welcome open markets, free markets, regionalization that way. Much of my colleagues who do policy work day in and day out to make that kind of thing happen. We certainly welcome it for Africa. Now, Nigeria on its own recently signed on to the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, which is an important step towards that regional integration. When markets open that way, it's much easier not just for American manufacturers, but Nigerian and manufacturers from around the world to move products. I mean, if you want to make an investment in, let's say, Sierra Leone, to be closer to that part of the market, if you need some of your raw materials to come from Nigeria to get to Sierra Leone, with the free trade agreement in place, it's so much easier to make that happen. It reduces your costs of doing business, of getting the products there, and it opens market access, but it also creates employment in both locations. So it's definitely a good thing.
Now, I'd like to hear your opinion on this. Now, in the last 2-3 years or so, we've had a couple of trade missions come, into the country, especially from Europe. What with Brexit, and we expect, obviously, with Brexit happening, these individual European countries have been coming to Nigeria, to renegotiate deals, or just look at the landscape as it were. There's also China, who's also moving quite aggressively, actually. I'm just wondering, what does that mean? Does it make it more competitive for the U.S., for instance? Or I'm just wondering how you look at the landscape when you see Europe on one hand renegotiating deals with African countries, the UK, if they sort down Brexit at some point, coming to renegotiate.
Right.
I'm just wondering, because it just looks like there's just so many moving parts, and it's just redefining trade for Africa.
What you get with American investment is not always well understood. And so I want to maybe frame it in this way. when American companies come to invest, they have a couple of priorities. One, obviously, is to make money, like any company. But two, it's to develop local talent. So if you look at the American companies that are on the ground for any period of time, after the first couple of years, most of the senior management are local people. What that does is create an ecosystem that then has a virtuous impact on the rest of the economy. The oil and gas industry has been doing it for 40 years. Every day, Esther, I'm talking to entrepreneurs who I like to say are graduates of Exxon or Chevron. They've spent time there. They've developed some managerial skills. They've earned a little money. And then they spin off and create their own businesses.
Brent, thank you so much for being our guest on the show today. We really do appreciate your time and, of course, your presence. I've been speaking to Brent Omdahl. He's a commercial counselor at the U.S. Embassy representing the Department of Commerce. We'll be looking at U.S.-Nigeria trade relations. So that's it on Beyond Markets. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of the show on our website at cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets. And, of course, you can send tweets to my Twitter handle too at Esther Awoniyi. From myself and the team, it's bye for now.